Kathy and myself started together about 35 years ago working on manatees. So we loaded up everything lock, stock, and barrel, came out to Florida, not knowing what a manatee was other than what we had seen in museum collections, the raw bones and the testament of interactions with water vessels and other things that we'd heard stories about. So we came out here and kind of got steeped right into their conservation. From the very get-go, we were in charge of the necropsy program. We were looking at manatees and seeing that last fatal mistake that they made in their lives. So from that, we trained and got exposed through the USGS Sirenia project, at the time it was Fish and Wildlife Service. And that program was involved in a lot of different research avenues and aspects. And so we were really fortunate in that we were involved in a lot of different things, not just manatee mortality and carcass examination, but we were involved in aerial surveys, life history studies, basic biological work, aerials, the whole limit. And so it exposed us to a lot of different things and kind of kept the board being bored at bay.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of your background was at the museum in LA, is that correct?
Yeah, Kathy and I worked at the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History and another famous museum there right on the coast, the Cabrillo Marine Museum. We were working with gray whales and stranded cetaceans. So our experience with marine mammals kind of got our foot in the door. So we got involved with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to come out here and do the necropsies on the manatees.
And what was your educational background at that point that you came to Florida?
At the time, it was we were both interested in conservation, and we were certainly interested in marine mammals. So at the time, we found ourselves kind of thrust into an area where not many people had kind of paved the way yet. And so it was a learning opportunity from the very get-go. We'd gotten our bachelor's degrees out at Cal State University Long Beach in biology, and basically just had a fundamental passion for the animals. So really we kind of consider ourselves in the right place at the right time. Very fortunate opportunity where we were able to come out and practice and learn and kind of pave the way for how the science was to develop over the next couple of decades.
When you think about where your passion for marine mammals came from, how early does that go back for you?
Well, you know, at that museum in Cabrillo Beach, we had educational programs where we had outreach and talk to the public. And we had grunion run programs where we were hatching eggs that the fish laid on the beach for school children. And we got to see firsthand and experience kids from the inner city of Los Angeles that lived maybe 5 or 10 miles from the ocean, never seen it in their lives. And so they got to see the excitement of educating these kids in these programs, kind of helped to build on why we were doing this. And there was some gratification out of that, you know, seeing these kids get exposed and excited, working with inner city kids in Los Angeles, really kind of gave us some reward and some payback immediately that was justified by working with this. And then we worked with the whale watch, and so we were taking kids out to see whales, and that was getting your foot in the door with marine mammals, so to speak. Now, I didn't really think I was going to get plunged into manatee work. Being from Southern California, I thought it was going to be strandings and cetaceans and pinnipeds and other marine mammals. But this opportunity came up and kind of steered us away. So when we moved from California to Florida, we thought we'd just be here a couple of years. And it was 5 years, and it was 10 years, and 15 years, and then the kids came along, and it was like, well, I guess we're parked here. And it was really, we were in a very fortunate situation. I mean, I love my job. How often do you get to don a mast, fins, and snorkel, get down in the water, and actually experience manatees in their natural element? And to do it at a time when very little was known about those manatees. So everything we learned was a turning point and a stimulus to kind of excite you even more. I was once asked, you know, how come you don't get bored working on just manatees your whole life? And I said, well, I'm not bored because I'm more excited about what I'm going to learn tomorrow than what I learned yesterday. And it's almost just every day, these animals just don't stop to cease to amaze you in their capabilities, and learning more about that, and then also seeing the recovery that's taken place over the tenure that we've been here has been a very rewarding aspect as well.
So for those that may not know, you know, certainly in 30 plus years you've had a wide range of experiences related to your job. Can you kind of just give people a feeling for, you know, what your job has entailed over the years?
Yeah, well, like I said, you know, don a mast, fins, and snorkel, get in the water. So it's a field opportunity where you get your feet dirty, and you learn in that regard. But then also to come with that comes some obligation and responsibility. You need to take good field notes. And we had very good trainers in the summer, project leaders in the early years that were very adept at taking notes and keeping journals and field books. And we were also very responsible in that we were doing the carcass examination. So we had to be very observant. We had to be able to articulate this in a written form so that we could put it down. And now in hindsight, when we look back at the boxes and reams of data that are out there, we see that it was through those natural observations and the documentation of that the legacy lives on. Mm-hmm. And that the foundation for building science and the direction the way science is going works on those avenues from those kinds of conceptual ideas that were placed back in the day.
So I recall that one thing that was of great significance that you had a hand in producing was the necropsy manual, so that other biologists and people that work on necropsying manatees now do it in a systematic, standardized way.
Yeah, and that's very important. So we're able to use this information technology and transfer it to other countries where, in the future, when we've learned about manatees, and manatees are in a stage of recovery right now to the point that they might get considered reclassified and even downlisted. In Florida, that's a good tribute, but really the frontier that's out there to kind of conquer and to understand is how we can use the information that we've learned here, this knowledge, and apply it to what we don't know in other places about manatee populations that are in peril. And it's through, I think, that concept that the excitable years are still there.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked out and learned quite a bit about the Florida manatee. So we have fundamentals and principles about biologically what their capabilities are and how they can handle that and deal with perturbations and other things. But now it's going in and applying that to build the public interest and the concept of what the value of an intrinsic manatee is. Mm-hmm. Is it still valued to be placed in a stew pot to feed a village, or can there be other ways to exploit the resource of a manatee by going out and looking at them, observing them in the wild, taking pictures of them, starting to understand that intrigue that the manatee is there to afford us.
It sounds like you have a really pretty even balance between looking at your career as a biologist and a conservation person. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's very fair because, there is some gratification to learn something biologically about something and to relate what that means to you. But there's also some value to take home on the conservation side of things. Someone once asked me, well, I never saw a dinosaur. Why don't my kids have to grow up to see manatees? Mm-hmm. And that hit to home saying, well, we would like everybody to see manatees. It's too bad we can't do anything about the dinosaurs. That's water under the bridge. Let's move on and talk about what we can do to protect and conserve the species that are out there. And then we find out some of the solutions because manatees are such a resilient species. They will allow us to protect them. Mm. And they can't lobby, they can't go to Tallahassee, they can't make laws, they can't negotiate those kinds of things. So they need an advocacy behind people. Mm. And I think that advocacy is charged when you get in the water and you see eye to eye with a manatee and you experience something that's as alien as another planet. And it's our aquatic systems that are, we can't hold our breath very well underwater. And it's almost, there's an analogy, if you were to stand on the dock and I pushed you in the water, you'd flail around. I mean, this is just not normal because we're so terrestrially developed with gravity and those kinds of things working against us that we feel completely out of our comfort zone in the aquatic environment. The same is similar for manatees. If you take a manatee and pluck it out of the water and put it on the beach, what does it do? It flops around. It wants to get back into the comfort zone. And so it's that different two-dimensional plane at the surface of the water that really kind of separates really two major planetary systems on Earth, on world Earth. And it's breaking those kinds of challenges and bringing them to the same threshold. I think they're important in understanding that we are one planet, we are one Earth, and that we pollute the land, we pollute the water too, and that there's an impact and a cost associated with that.
What would you say were the most difficult challenges for you along the way in doing this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, I'm the luckiest person on the planet. I love my job. I find it easy because I enjoy doing it, and I like having those different challenges, the up and the down, so I don't get into a mundane routine. But there were some things that were hard, you know, in the transition of going from the days when we would go up and pick up carcasses and examine the carcass, and we'd learn a lot about anatomy, and you'd go home with smelly fingers at the end of the day. When we passed that on to the state, I had to give it up. And I thought, oh my gosh, do I really want to do this? And then I found out that when I did that, you know, I not only didn't have to come home and wash my hands, but I immersed myself in the water in Crystal River and swam with live manatees. And so I looked at it in regard to having another opportunity rather than replacing an existing one. And that made me realize that if you get rutted into something, if you get so specific into one specific area, that it can become monotonous or boring. And that's been the nice thing about the Serenia project, is that there's so many diverse avenues of research that you don't know when you're going in if you're going to be doing Crystal River swimming with live manatees, aerial surveys, doing a carcass. There were a lot of different options that were going on to kind of stimulate that excitement. And it really was an excitement in the field, in the day, because you were on the cutting edge of a new frontier. It's almost like when you read books of history and you go back and, boy, it wouldn't have been interesting to be there 20 years ago or 100 years ago or 300 years ago. And now I kind of feel that way, saying, wow, we were kind of part of the history, and whether we were doing it right or wrong, we were learning from that process. Sure. And everybody makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. But if you don't learn from those mistakes, then you're not going to go anywhere. And I really think that that's where coming to grips with that kind of attitude is a healthy kind of thing.
Now, if you think about young people today that are at the beginning of thinking about establishing a career and maybe have an interest in marine mammals or manatees specifically, and have the values that are similar to yours, which have to do with conservation and the connectedness of the living world as you described it, what sort of suggestions or thoughts or perspectives do you have for those young people? You know, what would you recommend that they do to be able to work in that arena?
Yeah, well, I guess my first advice would be, don't be discouraged. If there's something that you're passionate about doing, it's in your heart, it becomes easier to do. And you know, you won't get a fortune, you won't be paid a lot, you might make more being an accountant than you will being a biologist, but you might enjoy your work a little bit more, and there's some reward associated with that. It's not as monetary, but it's more healthy. And so I think that if you really have an interest in marine mammals and you have an interest in manatees, you should steer yourself with your heart and look into what you want to do. And I would say it's hard to find a job right now, regardless of what you're looking for. But if you volunteer to get your foot in the door and you can prove to people in the position for hiring that you're an asset and that you have questions and you don't just ride along and do minimally what you're told to do, then there'll be a place for you. I really believe that. And we often have people that want to do internships, and they come, and some of them are okay, you know, they just kind of tweak along. But if you were asked, would you hire that person if you had some extra money in the budget, you'd say no. You want people there that are saying, we're going to try to get money to hire this person because they're going to benefit what we're trying to do. And they're part of the team. If you go into something and your attitude is that you're going to be the pinnacle, you're going to be in charge, and you're a one-man operation or one-person operation, you're not going to do as successful as you do working with a team and having a team approach. The old days of going in and writing the monographs, you know, where Murray and those guys would just sit down and write the whole thing out, and one guy fell on the shoulders of one guy or over. That descriptive stuff is great, but now there's so much concerted effort, and there's so much being involved in the technical side of things that you could be a jack of all trades but a master of none kind of approach with everything now. And if you don't take advantage of all of those other trades that are out there, you're shorting yourself on answering the questions or the problems that are needed to the species that you're trying to work with. So my bottom line is, hang in there, volunteer, and there are opportunities. You know, we do these captures in Crystal River. We invite people to go. I went and gave a lecture at the university the other day for the wildlife department, 170 students out there. I asked them, and some of them are coming to the captures. And if we approach that, that one person in that one group might be the one person that's going to come along and do something to really advance the science for manatees or for marine mammals. You have to treat it like the jewel in the rough. You have to mold that and help those people along. If you discourage people, it's going to want to change their lives, and it may just change the tempo of everything that they're trying to do. So give people an opportunity. And I've learned that because when I get older, I realize that, if we just sit on reams of data, it's going to die with us. That information is not going to be out there. So we really should be sharing this. We should be giving away this information for young minds to come through. And I think that UF has started to do that with their program. We have a lot of people now that have come through the program, gotten advanced graduate degrees based on some of the fundamental research in science and collection that was anticipated, but no one had the time to do in the project and with the state and the other agencies that are involved in this stuff. So I think that even though we've tapped into some of the resource and some of the data that's been mined here, there's still opportunities to go out and answer some pretty fundamental questions that need to be answered that we haven't done yet. We don't have time for. And we hope just don't get buried in piles of boxes somewhere and have to be excavated when it's too late.
Now, one of the things that you've done in your career is, go to lots of different places around the world, meet a lot of interesting people from various countries. Can you talk a little bit about some of that and how that's enriched your experience?
Yeah, well, very much so, because a lot of these other countries have watched what we've done. They've learned from what we've done. They've read the books that have been published on manatee biology, and our names keep cropping up, and they see that. And so there's an admiration there. When you go to Brazil and you talk to the students, and they're enthralled with what you've done in your career because they've learned a little bit about it. That's pretty exciting. It's pretty rewarding. And you don't want to discourage that at all. You want to keep that kind of thing going. What's wonderful is that when you go back and say in Crystal River and you're walking down the street by the dive shop and there's a little Polaroid picture of a manatee that says, come out and go swim with the manatees. You have to kind of think, well, that's probably what it was like when Hartman was in Crystal River, walking along the dive shops and saw the Polaroid of manatees that he saw the first time. He asked what they were and got him involved in studying manatee biology from that dive shop. Well, we see the same opportunities in these other countries. They're just trailing 30 years behind us. So the big fundamental question is, what have we learned in those 30 years that they can apply so they don't make the same mistakes? And then so these students that are there, and whenever we go to another country, we don't want to go in as the American scientists and go in and do something and then leave, conquer and leave. We want to leave something behind, the legacy. We want to train the students to get involved. In Belize, we have some exceptional students that are out there, and they're now carrying the torch and running the programs. There's a great one in Cuba right now, of which we know very little about manatees. It's going to probably carry that torch for a long, long time, and that would be one of the gaps in the puzzle. It's going to really help us to understand better about knowing the genetics of manatees in Florida compared to the manatee stepping stone in Cuba and Dominican Republic. And Antonio Minucci right now today is in Dominican Republic, or he's leaving Friday for Dominican Republic to get some more samples of manatees there. So it keeps going on. We keep building and building, and that's very rewarding. The big reward to me has been that, who would have thought that you worked with an endangered species and in your lifetime you're going to see it revert back and maybe be downlisted and not have to be protected, and you have enough of them that they're self-sustaining. Who would have thought that was the case? It really was kind of doom and gloom, when we started this stuff in the early days. And people, you asked about what the hardships were, in doing this stuff. What was the most difficult part? I think the difficult part was, one, accepting what the biology was trying to tell you, whether it was something you didn't want to hear or not. And people still want to hear that manatees are endangered. But the science is really kind of pointing to the fact that they're not. So that difficult part is educating the politic and the people that manatees might be better off than we give them credit for. And people fundamentally don't understand that. I think that's something that's kind of hardwired in us, that we want to be nurturing. we want to find a cause, we want to jump in there and do it. I think you can still have that cause, you can still nurture it, you can still be compassionate, but manatees are going to reward you, and they have, and that's been one of the gratifying things in the whole picture. So then again, that was the endangered species. Who would have thought that they're going to literally pull themselves up by the bootstraps and and tough it out, and it's only because they can learn to live with people
Yeah.
in these environments. If we treat them right, being the creatures of habit that